Good morning, Abby. How are you?
I'm so good. Happy to be here.
Good. Me too. Me too. It's almost October, so this year is moving quicker than I think any of us expected. It's 2020, but how did we get to October?
It's crazy.
I'm so excited to talk to you.
It's been the longest, slowest year ever.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. Time is really difficult to understand right now. Have you ever noticed how the brain doesn't actually comprehend time in a linear way sometimes? I've wanted to study that because I don't understand that. You know what I mean? I feel like you could talk about that. But this morning, we're going to talk dance, which is something that I know that you have experience with dancers, but it's not your main world. So if you could tell us a little bit about, you're a life consultant and a podcast host. Can you tell us a little bit about just your journey with life consulting and being in the life coach world? Because I wanted to invite some mindset coaches on here and life coaches because I think dancers are in dire need of that too. So can you tell me how you got started with life consulting and all of that?
Yeah. Well, I grew up really tormented. So I had tons of self-hatred, anxiety, shame. I was so self-conscious, and lots of pressure to be perfect and to do everything right. And so I had a lot of an internal tormenting world. And as I went on the journey to get healing from that and to get a healthier mindset and to learn how to connect to love, it radically transformed my life. And so we began, I just would be sharing with my friends about what I was learning and what was happening in our world, and then their lives would radically transform. And so we ended up having a friend who, this is probably about 10 years ago, who said, "Hey, I'm getting so much life transformation. I want to start paying you to meet with me purposefully because that's what you're made to do. And I want to honor the gift that you have on your life." And I was like, oh, okay.
Wow.
So we let her pay us just because she was so nice, but we didn't really think anything of it. And then what happened was everyone in her life was like, "You're changing so much. Like, what is going on in your life?" And then she'd be like, "Oh, well, I'm meeting with these people." So we met with her, and then all of a sudden we had all of these people who were wanting to meet with us because they were seeing the tangible results of it. And so we just accidentally started a business. It wasn't our plan. It wasn't like, "Hey, let's become life consultants." It was literally like, "Oh, there's a demand and we can't keep up. So I guess we did this."
Yeah. Wow.
So me and my husband have worked with thousands of clients, and I've had several professional dancers. One of the people I worked with was one of the professionals on Dancing with the Stars, and then other people in that arena. And it's been a great thing because so much of what I do is teaching people the culture of unconditional love instead of shame and fear and punishment. Because punishment is something, I did a lot of this. I used punishment to keep myself in line. So if I didn't do something good enough, I would beat myself up for it. Yeah. Or if I felt like I failed, I would go over and over that mistake in my head with regret and self-hatred. And there was no room for imperfection, and there was no room for learning and growing, and I had zero self-compassion. And the problem is that our brains can't process through the pain process without self-compassion, and without receiving compassion from others. Yeah. And so the reason I think the dance world can be so toxic is it is a culture of not only girls beating themselves up, because let's be honest, a lot of dancers are the types of people who have a lot of self-discipline, and those people can often be the people that are really hard on themselves.
Sure, totally. Yeah.
And so the learning how to receive compassion and love from others, from God and from yourself, is such a massively important
Sure.
Tool to not let the culture around dancing of performance actually like kill your heart.
Right. Yeah. Wow. Shame, fear, and punishment. I think that I've talked a lot about shame and fear, but punishment's always attached to them when unconditional love isn't like the natural response or the first response or the we're going to work to get to that place. That's amazing.
There's so much punishment. I mean, even like in dance, there's punishment like, oh, I don't weigh the right amount. I'm going to just not eat for however long. Or, oh, I messed up that thing. Now I think I'll never get a shot again. When you're in a high stakes culture, which dance can be a high stakes culture. You make a few mistakes and now you're on this path instead of this path. And so punishment is like a natural thing that people will do to try to keep themselves in line. And what they don't understand is you can only discipline yourself. I'm so sorry. Throat tickle. You can only discipline yourself for so long, and then everything begins to, you can't force yourself to be on and perfect all the time. So if you have a cycle of punishment, you can like punish, but then you'll have the thing that you don't want pop up somewhere else because you can only shove it down for so long.
Right. And what would you say happens then? What do we see?
Well, it could be anything from like a great example is like an eating addiction, right? So like I can starve myself for so long and then I binge.
Yeah.
Or like I can shut down my emotions for so long and then I have an emotional breakdown. Yeah. Or I can push through the pain of this injury for so long and then the injury takes me out for a year.
Totally.
So it's like whatever we're trying, like oftentimes people don't recognize that the fastest way to where we want to go is actually much more the compassionate kindness route, because we can avoid the huge explosion that keeps us in the cycle of chaos and performance and punishment.
And how have you seen dancers, specifically the ones that you've worked with or whatever, how have you seen their journeys with kindness and compassion, affect their careers?
Well, I would say the first thing that I would say is it typically takes a little bit. One of the things I have the most compassion on dancers is there can be a brainwashing, because anytime we're a part of any culture, and it could be like a church culture, it could be a political culture, it could be your sexuality culture, it could be whenever we're a part of a strong culture, it means those core values get deeply ingrained in us. And when we hear that, when we hear a truth, it doesn't have to be the truth, but every culture has truths. Your family culture has truths. Yeah. Your ethnicity culture has truths. Your religious culture, whatever truths you hear over and over and over again can somewhat brainwash you. And some of that's beautiful. Like if you have a culture where learning to love people really well is a truth of that culture, that brainwashing, that peer pressure can actually help you become the best version of yourself. But if you're in a culture where, so what I've seen with a lot of dance is it's a culture of your body needs to be perfect and you need to be perfect. And then you're having those, so like I wasn't a dancer. I got kicked out of ballet at a young age because I had an eye patch. And I
was thinking you were going to say you were just goofing off too much in class or something.
No, I had an eye patch and they covered my good eye, and the eye that could see was basically blind. And so I ran into all of the girls the whole time. They're like, you can't do this.
Oh.
Which is hysterical. But I had on my own that performance, I need to be perfect. There's pressure. If I miss something, it'll ruin my whole life. It'll ruin everything. So lots of people have that already inside of them. And I didn't have an external culture that was necessarily saying that over and over again. So lots of dancers have this, I need to be what people want me to be inside of them. And they have every person, the other, not ballerinas, but the other dancers, the other
The directors and
the
choreographers.
directors, yes, the choreographers, everyone is reinforcing this truth. And you see it passed down. Like one of my clients, all of her, I wanted to call them professors, but what do you call them?
In the college, they'd be dance professors. Yeah.
Yeah, she was in a like
conservatory.
Mm-hmm. And so all of them were passing down to her the culture that was passed down to them.
Sure.
So again, they're not evil, they're not horrible, but the way that they were taught was punishment and high stakes and removing love and praise and affirmation if you don't do it right. And so then they pass that down to you. And so again, you can learn. So what I'm saying is, as working with dancers, it's a real, in the beginning, it's a real battle to get them to believe that kindness and affirmation and love could get you anywhere. Because most people honestly believe that self-punishment and hating yourself is what motivates you to grow.
Yeah.
And so they want to hold on to that because they're like, I'll quit striving to be the best if I don't hate myself when I mess up. Totally. I'll quit growing if I don't beat myself up, then there'll be no motivation. And so it's really a battle in the beginning of actually helping people connect, one, to the logic that love and kindness and compassion help logically your brain get through pain, but two, that we show up as our best selves when we're loved.
Yeah.
Show up as our best version when we know that we're going to be seen and heard and taken care of. And when we know that there's grace for us and that we have options. Like people think that if they're loved, they'll quit trying and just become a mess. But actually, when you're loved, you come up into more of who you're made to be. Your energy, when you don't feel loved, you're using a lot of energy to perform to get love. When you're loved, you get to use all of your energy to actually be and do what you want to do.
Yeah, come on.
And so you're not actually separating, like in performance where you're just striving to do everything perfect, then you're beating yourself up. Half your energy is beating yourself up. And so one of the things that really changed my mind is there's a verse that says a house divided can't stand. And I remember reading that verse and knowing that's my life. I've been against myself for so long. I've been beating myself up. I'm at war with myself. And I think about like a country. So if you think about the U.S., if they are in civil war and trying to fight a war overseas, they're not going to have the same resources. They're not going to have the same focus, the same strategy. Like to be at war or to conquer something else, you actually need you to be in unity. And so I recognize that there are all these things I wanted to do in my life that that I was fighting myself on because there was such an inner battle with how I treated myself, how I spoke to myself. Like I was constantly abandoning me. I was constantly beating myself up. And that battle was draining my energy and my resources, where once I silenced that battle and began to agree with love and compassion for myself, then I had all of that to aim towards whatever goal I wanted to aim.
That's brilliant. I've never thought about it that way, about energy, honestly, and how much we're using in certain ways and where we're putting it out. It's almost like getting your life back entirely. Yeah. And it is so true that we think that shaming ourselves or negative self-talk is going to help motivate us. We see it not just in the dance culture, but all over Western culture in general. Kick your butt, like boot camp style, you know? And we see people get results like that, you know? And so we believe, okay, well, they are carrying the results, so I will just follow that model. But we haven't frequently been shown a model of loving ourselves into excellence, like you're saying. Yeah, I actually want to hear a story from you that I've heard you tell one time. And I always think about it, but I'm like, I forget some of the details. And it's the one where you talked about, I think you met a man in Africa or a son in Africa? And you were talking about, it was years ago that I heard you talk about it. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Can you remind me about that story? I think it's just such a good illustration. Yeah.
And so, so there's this is a story that helped me understand love and punishment and the cycle that we're in. And so there's this little boy who's starving in Africa. You can see all of his bones. His belly is sticking out. He looks so sick. And a relief organization comes to actually bring food to his village. And this boy is an orphan, but he has a guardian. And so the relief organization comes and brings food and says, please let us feed your son. And the guardian says, I'm so sorry, but he actually made a mistake at school today, and so I'm not going to let him eat until he figures out how to pay more attention in school. And the relief worker is like devastated, obviously, because this kid needs food and he can tangibly see it. But the guardian is so intense, he has to leave and walk away. And so then later that day, the same thing happens. Another person tries to bring food and is like, please let me feed your son. And then, please let me feed your son. And the relief worker is begging basically to give them food. And the man who's in charge says, I'm so sorry, but I've asked him to like work on building this house. And he says he's too weak to do it. And until he can do it, I'm not going to let him eat, to remind him that he needs to get that done. And so the relief worker is like devastated and walks away, so sad. And so then again, one more time, they're like, we're just going to try one more time, a different person, to just see if we can get him to have mercy. So he brings the master this offering of food and says, please let me feed your son. And the guy says, I'm so sorry, but do you see how disgustingly thin he looks? Do you see how gross he looks? Until he looks better, I'm not going to let him eat, because he needs to know that that's unacceptable. And so the relief worker obviously is devastated and walks away. And typically when I share this story, I have a picture so people can actually visualize a little child that's innocent, that is starving, because we can often connect to compassion when we can see it outside of us. And when I heard this story, I remember feeling God being like, Abby, you are the master. You're the gatekeeper of love for yourself. And anytime that you turn love away, you're literally starving yourself of the thing that you need. Because what does the kid need to be able to have more attention span in school? He needs love. Not love, he needs food. Sorry. He does need love.
They equal each other.
But yeah, in this allegory, the food is love. And so the kid needs food to be able to pay more attention in school. He needs food to be stronger, to work on building the house. He needs food to be able to gain weight. And so when the master is asking him to do these things without food, he's actually starving him of the very thing he needs in order to be able to do those things. And that is like the analogy that I've lived with in my life, which is oftentimes I'm trying to demand, I'm like putting the cart before the horse. I'm wanting to perform before giving my soul the food and the nourishment that it needs. And so after this story like came to me, I remember this line just stuck for me, because I could have so much compassion on this child. Yeah, it was very easy to. And so I put that picture of that starving African in my car, on my phone, so that I could be reminded. And anytime I started beating myself up, I would say, is this worth starving this kid of food for?
Oh, wow.
Is this worth abusing this little child for? Because
Wow.
I would say like starving that kid of love would be abuse. And
Totally.
yet that's what we
Yeah.
do all the time. I remember, so
Right.
like when I began this journey, I mean, almost a decade ago. I mean, I was on the learning to love myself journey for a long time, but this
Yeah.
specific story was about a decade ago. And I remember I was late for a meeting and I was like, how am I an adult and I'm still late and I can't figure out how to be on time? Like, what in the world is going
Mm-hmm.
on? And then I just remember this thought popping into my mind. So is being late worth starving the kid for?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, no, that's so dumb. I would never starve a child for being late to a meeting. And so it began to be the referee thing for me.
Yeah.
Like, what would I starve a child for? Now, that is complicated if you have an eating addiction or if you had an eating disorder and
Yeah.
you believe in starving things. So that may not be a good analogy for everybody. But
Yeah.
for me, it was a really stark, and I was like, I can't do that to myself. I can't be cruel to myself. I can't withhold love. And
Yeah.
I really began to I began to understand that what I wanted to be, what I wanted to become, could only happen if love
Yeah.
got in there first.
Even if it was so unfamiliar
Mm-hmm.
to that pathway.
And it took me a while, but I'll say this.
Yeah.
I can say tangibly in my life that when I connected to love instead of punishment, I began to get rid of trauma. I began to get rid of pain from my history.
Wow.
I began to release what was going on. And I have so much more capacity in my brain to do things, get things done. I have so much more capacity to be productive. Like the amount of space to be the person I wanted to be. I now can be confident and be comfortable in my own skin and have something to offer people and all the things I wanted to be when I hated myself. You don't have access. It's kind of like the Limitless movie where he takes the pill and then his brain opens up and he can use his brain for all of the things that he wasn't aware that his brain could do. That's what happens when self-love comes in, is that all of it's like on your phone, when you have all of your apps running, they're all draining your battery.
Yeah.
But when you close them out, then your battery can last long for whatever you need your phone for. And that's the same thing, like self-hatred and shame and punishment and fear beat you up over and over and over again. It drains your battery.
Sure. I have a random question that you may not feel like I have no idea what to say about that. But when you talked about, abuse kind of being normalized in the dance culture, or at least that was my interpretation. For me, that's real. The way I look at it, I don't really have a tolerance anymore for vocabulary and tone and language that puts down the dancer, that puts down anyone, quite frankly. I was so acquainted with it. I was totally used to it. I thought, yeah, this is the way to motivate ourselves to work harder. Just maybe imagine with me, but I don't know. But I want to envision a culture that's completely different, And I don't know if there's, examples that we've seen, but like, how could you envision and how could you see practically, what are some of the ways that you think that we could recreate a different culture as dancers?
I know that when because I have, so we have lots of employees, we have had lots of interns. So I believe in straightforward communication and confrontation because I want to see people become the best that they can be. So I am not like, oh, we need to coddle people. I think that's often what people imagine is if you get rid of punishment, you turn into coddlers.
Yes.
That are like, so like with my employees, I would say like, I'm always calling them up. Like, I'll be like, hey, I know you have more in you than this. I know you can do this. I've seen you be able to do da 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 da. And there's times when I'm like, hey, what's going on? And so some of the things I think would infuse love into the dance culture is, one, checking in on people when they're not performing like normal, like, hey, what's going on in your world? Because most of the time there's something emotional underneath the surface if we're not showing up as us. And so instead of saying you need to shut that down and disassociate, if you just take a little bit of time and acknowledge it and love it, then you can pull people back into being able to engage. Then there's times of like where I'm like, hey, and I've done this with all of the people I've led, I know that there's more you're capable of. What's going on inside that's keeping you from that? Or there's times when the people I've overseen have made mistakes, and I'm like, okay, what are you going to do to clean this up? And that's not harsh. That's actually, I want to empower you. So like in dance culture, if you're making a lot of mistakes, being like, okay, let's look at that. There's a problem here, and let's come up with a solution for how to grow from this, instead of identifying you as the problem. Like there's something wrong in you. It's separating performance from identity. So if you have where like there's times when people around me have failed and I've seen you actually just need love. So I just pull them in and I hug them and I love them, and then they feel safe to try again. And when we can risk big, we often perform better. And so there's times where actually when people fail, being met with kindness and softness is so healing. Then there's times when people fail where I'm kind and soft, but I also am firm in the idea of like, okay, you failed. That's not the end of the world. We can come back. Part of it is having a belief system that failure doesn't mean you're a failure, and failure doesn't mean you'll be stuck as a failure, and failure doesn't mean you'll never get it. So when you have a different belief system, like the way I'm using my words when people mess up is like, okay, we can do it again, and you're going to get this. Like it's much more like empowering than shaming. And so, but again, you can motivate people. Like if, let's say somebody isn't pushing themselves physically and they're holding back, I'm going to check in on them. Like, hey, what's going on? And then oftentimes you're going to find like, oh, I got really injured and I have this fear of injuring myself again. Oh, okay, let's actually talk and have some compassion for that. And then you're going to be able to come right back in, or, oh, I'm actually feeling tired, or I'm actually feeling whatever. When you can meet people with, your brain actually is built this way. If you're having emotion going on inside of you, if somebody meets you with emotion of compassion, you can then switch over to logic. And so what happens in the dance culture is they're using logic to try to shut down emotion. Instead of, if you're like, hey, I see that you're trying really hard. I see that you're having a hard day. Is there something going on? No. Okay. How can we connect? What can we do to help you get motivated? So I ask people, and different people need different things being motivated. Some people really love deadlines. They love hard goals. Some people really need affirmation. Like it's just all of that.
Yeah, right. And it changes, I think, in our lives. Like one season we might majorly need more affirmation. One season we may majorly need like, just tell me what to do. I should just rise up to the challenge. That's super good. Yeah. So what I'm seeing, in
that culture, it would be that instructors care about the soul and the emotional well-being of the people they're instructing, and then their empowerment and push and drive is connected to their belief in people without needing to keep them down into it.
I think what I've noticed is that a lot of times dancers start off with this incredible flame, and they're just so sweet and excited, myself included, and they're so alive and they have so many dreams. And then also the income levels of dancers, you end up booking yourself for gigs that maybe feel compromising to you or feel way lower than your pay level. And so dancing becomes either just about paying the bills, or it becomes about just proving to whomever that you value that you can do it. And it doesn't become about you and just expressing yourself and loving the gift that you have and loving the career that you have,
And it's a really big bummer because everyone has one of those people in their mind that they're proving wrong.
Totally.
What they don't understand. And so people think that's good motivation to like have people who didn't
Watch
believe in
me.
you so
Yeah,
that
prove
you
it to
can
them.
push yourself.
Yeah.
But what they don't understand is no matter how many people you win, that voice doesn't go away. You could win them. Like you could win their actual voice back. They could affirm you and it's
Yeah.
still get rid of that thing inside of you. And so
Yeah.
I've watched people get to the top of their career, to the top of the totem pole, and they still are feeling that self-hatred, that frustration.
Yeah. It never ends. It's scary to step back into love. It's super scary to step back into love. I think the biggest thing that I think dancers would feel and can feel is I'm going to be lazy. And, you know, we're so caught up with like athleticism, the athletic requirement of being a dancer. When you've been so hard on yourself for so long, just help us describe a little bit for us the transition, moving out of shame and fear and punishment and into love, and how to maybe coach yourself into that.
Well, for me, it just started very simply, like with apologizing to myself, seeing myself as a human. This is something me and my husband talk about a lot is oftentimes I would never treat someone else the way I treat myself. And so beginning to repent, like, hey, I've been telling you how bad you are. And I've been looking at everything you've done wrong instead of praising you for everything you've done right. And people forget this too. Like, I think dogs are a great example. If you reward dogs, they learn really well. Like if you're like, good job, good job. Like that's how I trained my dog where to poop. Like, because every time he pooped outside, I was like, oh my gosh, you did it. And like the dog loved being affirmed. And what people don't understand is affirmation is as addictive as punishment. And so when we get good at affirming ourselves and we get good at like, that is also a beautiful motivator. And so I started by hinting to myself for all the ways I'd turned on myself, been at war with myself, abandoned myself, punished myself, looked at how I was like the master, like in that story with the boy, like I'm the parent of my soul. I'm the one, the gatekeeper of love in my life. And so I started just saying, I want to learn to love you. And I invited God as unconditional love to come and help teach me a new culture and teach me a new system. I mean, I literally was like, come and show me what unconditional love looks like. And that was such a huge part of it for my story, but also practical things like learning to say kind things. I learned to say kind things before I felt them about myself. And so I have actually, like, I did a very, like, I had so many steps in my journey of learning to love myself. I have a product called Unconditional How to Let Love Win, where I share my story about learning how to let love win and the different seasons and how it looked in different moments for agreeing with love. And me and my husband also have a product called the Compassion Project, which is, it literally is how to have self-compassion on yourself, how to retrain your brain, what compassion does for you, what compassion practically sounds like, what compassion practically looks like, how to not abandon yourself, what kinds of things to say over yourself. So it's basically like
amazing. Yeah.
And it will teach you how to love other people well too, because again, like the dance instructors, they're teaching their clients, they're treating them the way they treat themselves.
Right. 100%. Right.
And so when we change both how we treat ourselves, we also change how we treat others.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, what are you guys working on right now? Or what are you kind of releasing right now? But you kind of shared it with us.
Once a year we have well, not maybe once a year, we're going to start doing it more often, but we do a course called Living Fully Alive, where we help people go on the journey of, because what a lot of dancers do and people in life, is we disassociate in order to perform. And so Living Fully Alive is about reconnecting to yourself and others and getting the blocks out of your way that have kept you shut down or in self-hatred cycles or in addiction cycles. So it's just the journey of how to process life and emotions well so that you can be fully alive in the season that you're in. So we're releasing that course We do that live, and we have an immersion program where you get to do it with other people and be connected to other people and get weekly coaching and all that stuff. So we're really excited about that. The Compassion Project is also out, and that is a really
that's cool.
The testimonies, the stories we hear from people getting to experience love for the first time is so beautiful and
so radical. Yeah, I did your Living Fully Alive course, and you guys highly recommended. Also, the Connected Life podcast.
Yes.
I lived in Mexico last summer, went there solo and was teaching a dance company down there, but I didn't have a car, and it was very hot. And so the Connected Life podcast kept me laughing through some hard times.
Through those long, sweaty walks.
Seriously, like uphill, downhill, sweating, Mexico, just dirty, like dirt flying, and I was just like, I'm so happy. It's okay. I'm listening to Abi and Justin. I love my life. I'm fine, I felt like connected back to the U.S. What'd you say?
I just said I love that.
Yeah, seriously. It kept me alive. Kept me fully alive. Abi, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I just have one brief question for you while you're in the midst of COVID as well as all of us, and some of the things that have happened for dancers is just like performance venues are completely shut down, for companies are folding, whole studios are folding. So what would you just say if there's one bit of advice that you would kind of coach us into on mindset while we're experiencing kind of a dancing happens together. You can do it at your house, but it really happens together. So just in general, one bit of advice you'd give our dancers.
Yeah. Well, what I would say is I'm 36, and I have had several seasons in my life where everything died. When I was, sports was my whole life, and when I was in 9th grade, I was in a car wreck where I couldn't sit or stand or walk for longer than a few minutes at a time, and everything ended in that. I mean, I couldn't push a shopping cart. I couldn't do anything. So my whole life was taken out there, and I've had multiple seasons like that where just death happens and you didn't choose it. Death in the emotional sense of what was normal or what I did love or what my life did look like. I've had that happen several times throughout my life, and every time it is painful. So I recommend grieving. Grieving is super important.
Totally.
So that we don't get stuck in the pain. But I have seen the death process be liberating in every season. And so you always have a choice when you go through a death season, whether it's going to harden you and make you skeptical and fearful towards the world, or whether it's going to liberate you and soften you into your best self. And so I'm looking at it and I'm like, yeah, there's a lot of pain and fear happening in the communities that are hit the hardest, and dance is one of those. And so the idea is, how do I come alive in my identity if this is on pause? And the belief, I really have a belief that death, and this is partially because of my faith, I believe there can always be resurrection after death.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so for me, the death process is the invitation into new life, where something will rise that's different. I think about a phoenix. It dies and it comes back more powerful. And so for me, when there's seasons of death,
winter,
I have allowed it to kill. In high school, I allowed it to transform. Oh, my identity is not that I play sports anymore. I have to actually find out who I am without being able to do physical activities. I have to actually love myself without getting my affirmation needs met through these ways. Oh, I actually have to connect to myself and find myself. And oh, now I have more free time. What am I going to do with that? And so the idea is seeing how can this be a gift that liberates me while I am grieving it. And I just honestly came out, for me personally, of a death season recently. And it's true, if you engage in what is it that what pain gets brought up in this death that I can actually feel and release, so that when I come back to life, when pieces come back together, because Corona is going to end, dance will come back to life, studios will pop up again, dancers will have jobs again. That's going to happen. So when that happens, I want to be my best self, because I use this time to get free, to grow, to learn, to become, to find myself. Like very few people, it's like we get a forced vacation.
Yeah.
And that's when you can go deepest oftentimes. And so I would hate for people, because of their fear of what's going to happen and the pain of what's going on, to miss out on this season where they actually get the chance to grow and become.
Yeah, super good. Super good. And I think grieving is a huge, huge part that we forget to do. Just don't judge yourself for feeling the pain of this. Totally.
100%. You have to grieve.
Yeah. And then find the gift that's available. Thank you, Abi. So good. You're so wonderful. Your story is so potent. It is so like alive, and it's been going on for a long time for you, and it just still carries so much weight for all of us. So I just so appreciate your time this morning. Seriously. And you guys, I'll put a link to her website and all her goods in our email here. So go check them out. They are stunners. Appreciate you. Thank you. All right. Have an amazing day, Abi.
You too. Thank you so much.
Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Ciao.